this morning. I am Lisa Mercurio, Vice President of Business Development with AdvanceCT, and so happy to be partnering this morning with all of our dear friends from CEDAS. Thank you all for joining us for this very exciting drive this morning. So with that, I just wanted to really acknowledge the fact we try and do as many in-person events as we can. Obviously, virtual is much more efficient, but really nothing beats being able to have our one-on-one conversations, to meet people for the first time, and then to reconnect with former colleagues. So do appreciate your time this morning. We have quite a few folks that are going to be speaking. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Executive Director here today, our host, Brenton Graham. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure to welcome you to Connecticut's largest historic district, to one of its first and perhaps most exemplary cultural districts, to a certified local government, and in fact to the Holcomb Education Center at the Webb, Deane Stevens Museum, which opened in 2021 and was entirely a game changer for this museum and I think a nice addition to the town. This museum was founded in 1919 by the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America in the state of Connecticut, which had been organized as early as 1893 by Elizabeth Colt and a few other very enterprising ladies at that time. And I want to acknowledge Tita Highland, who is the current president of the Dames. It remains a really robust and vital organization filled with incredibly smart women who are well-connected and very well accustomed to making things happen. And that's a great basis for this museum, which becomes sort of its public face and its public mission to bring the community together. And this new building is a part of that. It became a player, really the first player in historic preservation here in Wethersfield in 1919 when it purchased the Joseph Webb House, the 1752 Joseph Webb House, which is the middle of the three houses you see on the street. I'll leave it to Mayor Lesser to tell you why that house has been so special for all this time when he makes his concluding remarks. But the Dames expanded then to the houses on either side, which include the home of Silas Deane, America's first foreign diplomat, who has an incredible story. We've been partnering with the U.S. State Department to better expound, and it helps us get at questions of American democracy and its viability in the past and going forward in the future. And the Isaac Stevens House next to that. It was in the 1970s that preservation really took off here in Wethersfield, and there is a book coming out this fall about it by the late Anne Kukrow, who together with her husband Lee spearheaded the movement to turn the historic area into something really vibrant and vital. And we're pleased to be co-publishing that with Wesleyan University Press. It's the story of how all of the organizations and the town government here came together over the past couple of generations to make all of this possible. It has become, I think it's safe to say, the basis for economic growth that we are experiencing so robustly today in Wethersfield. All of these entities work together. I've been here 9 months, and I've got to tell you, I've never worked in such a functional community before. So thank you, Wethersfield. So without any further ado, I want to thank you for being here, welcome you. I want to welcome you back to tour the museum. We have tours running every week and content in the galleries and lots of incredible programming, often with nationally significant experts on a wide variety of fields. But I will turn it over to Paige Bronk to continue the program.
Thank you very much. My name is Paige Bronk. I'm the president of CEDAS. I want to thank you all for being here today, making it through the weather. I'm pretty sure there's no pollen left in the air, which is great. Just a few words regarding CEDAS. CEDAS is a not-for-profit organization, and our role is in doing exactly what we're doing today. We're pretty well established, and we work with a number of groups, private, nonprofit, federal, state, regional. Our membership is over 200 individuals, and it represents all those sectors that I mentioned. Basically, today, with today's event, we want to thank AdvanceCT, Lisa and staff for helping to coordinate this, most especially thank Daniel O'Keefe for being here from DECD.
Please call me Dan, unless I'm in trouble.
Dan. Very good. Also, I wanted to mention, what does CEDAS do? CEDAS is involved with networking, problem solving. Probably our largest benefit is the collection of all of the economic developers involved with our membership. The network is fairly tight. There's increased communication, programming, and we work together and try to advance these initiatives throughout the state. The other point I wanted to make is that our sponsor today, M&J Engineering, Lynn Giovanni has been instrumental in involving M&J as a sponsor often. Lynn is also our second VP in CEDAS. M&J is a multidisciplinary engineering firm that offers consulting within Connecticut and beyond. So we thank them for their support. Lynn will be here to answer any questions that people may have regarding M&J. At this point, I think we will roll it back into the program. Kevin Bielmeyer, our first vice president, is our programs committee chair. He always does an excellent job. And without further ado, thank you.
Thank you, Deane. And thank you, Dan, for being here. We really appreciate it. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to have a conversation. And when we're done having the conversation in front of all of you, then I'll open it up to all of you to join in the conversation and bring your questions or your comments to Dan while we have them as time allows. And at that time, when we get to that part, we'll have you step over there where that podium is and that mic so that we can all hear your question. And Dan, we're going to start with the part you hate the most, I think, your bio, if I could. So Dan O'Keefe, Commissioner.
I always describe this, you know when someone's singing happy birthday to you, and you have to sit there and wait? This is always what it feels like to me. Please, go ahead. And I always feel like, oh, please make it stop.
You can have some water, you can just, check your messages while we're doing this. Dan was nominated by Governor Ned Lamont as Commissioner of DECD in November 2023. He has served as the state's first Chief Innovation Officer since July 2023, and will continue in this additional role until a successor is found. Dan serves as a passionate advocate for the economy and communities throughout Connecticut, focusing on economic growth, workforce development, vibrant communities, and job creation. Prior to entering public service, Dan was a technology investor for 25 years, investing in high-growth, innovative companies in the software, consumer, and fintech markets, companies that went on to create tens of thousands of jobs. Dan also serves as a board member and chairperson emeritus of the Opportunity Network, an education and career skills focused nonprofit reaching over 40,000 high potential students from historically marginalized communities. Dan holds an MBA with high distinction, Baker Scholar from Harvard Business School, where he served as president of its alumni board, and an AB from Brown University, where he serves on as its president's leadership council.
Wow. Let's be blowing out the candles. Finally done.
One breath. So we're going to start off an easy one. So you've been educated in Rhode Island and in Boston, and you worked for quite a while in Manhattan. So are you a Yankees, Mets, or Red Sox fan?
So that was the part of the conversation I hate. Let me start with the part of the job that I love, this is my favorite part of the job. So one of the nice things about this is I'm now able to get out and really visit with communities throughout the state. I am going to answer your question. I'm going to answer it this way. My parents chose Massachusetts. I chose Connecticut. So we chose Connecticut in 2011 to raise our family here. We did it because of incredible communities like this. This was a place where I wanted to raise my children, where we want to raise our children. Let me back up and give you my personal background. I talk a lot about the concept of workforce housing, because I grew up in workforce housing, but we stretched the definition. We had 8 people packed into a 3-bedroom. My mother was a public school teacher, and I kind of always, I had a view of wanting to kind of get out into the world and see what more there might be. I ended up going to a school where it was a boarding school, and I got to meet students from all over the world. And for me, that time period in my life was incredibly transformative. I started to really pay attention to what the art of the possible might be. And I gotta be honest with you guys, I met a bunch of kids from Connecticut, and these were like the fancy people. These were the people you aspired to be. Connecticut became a place for me where you went when you made it. And so when I finally had some resources of independence, et cetera, and started to think about where I wanted to raise my family, raise my kids, my wife and I chose Connecticut, and we've never looked back. Now, I haven't answered your question. I'm a Boston sports fan. People always ask me where I'm from. I say I live in Connecticut, but I'm from Boston. If you grow up under Boston sports, that doesn't change. And I'm a season ticket holder for the Patriots. I have a fun picture with Tom Brady I'm happy to show you. And I know I'm sort of in the more Massachusetts end of the spectrum here, so I feel like I'm in a safe audience to say that. I also want to make a quick comment. Wait, not everybody sounds like, okay, sorry. I'll duke it out later. I want to also make a comment about the other fun part of this job is meeting with political leadership. We've got a couple mayors here, we've got a first selectman in the back. And one of the things people said to me also was, be prepared to be frustrated by the people involved in politics. And it's like one of these like knee-jerk reactions we have, right? If you're in politics, you must have motives that aren't necessarily perfect. And I've got to tell you guys, as I've traveled the state and met with more of our political leadership, the opposite is true. These are people who deeply care about their communities. And I'll make a comment about Mayor Lesser, who I'm going to start calling Mayor Greater. So one of the first phone calls I got when I joined was from the mayor. And I forget how, I think you found me on LinkedIn. I think it was we
have a mutual friend in the industry.
There you go. And so one of the first phone conversations I had was with the mayor. And very quickly after I became Commissioner of Economic Development, had a chance to visit with the team here and learn more about this part of the world. So I say all of that just to say, the communities I've gotten to know in this job, including this one, have been absolutely incredible and warm and welcoming, and it's just been awesome. And the leadership that really is trying to reinvigorate and continue to invigorate the Connecticut economy is deeply committed to the task. So that's been the fun part of the job.
That's
longer
great.
answer
Wow,
to
you
a
just
short
went through a
question.
whole bunch of my questions. You must have saw the list ahead of time. Yeah, actually, so the next question you did answer in part, but I'll get to the second part. First was I was going to have you rewind, talk about what brought you to Connecticut. I think you definitely hit hard on that. So let's do the second part of the question, which was what led you at this time in your career to public service?
Yeah, but by the way, let's also talk a little bit about Connecticut, because I think part of what I got excited about. I'll give you the story. So a little over a year ago, I sat down and I had lunch with our governor. I was considering a potential federal appointment. I've said that publicly. It's not really public, but it's something I was considering. And someone said to me, "Well, if you're really thinking about this, you should meet the governor." And 4 days later, we sat down and we had lunch. And I am so used to. I do a lot of federal candidate fundraising in my old world, and I am just so used to the perfect coiffed speech, hair and white teeth, and like the structured speech where you feel like you're not talking to a person, you feel like you're talking to prepared talking points. Governor walks in with his Grateful Dead belt. We share a pizza, and it was a very casual, unstructured conversation, but with one organizing principle, which was the concept of impact. And I had 25 years in the public sector, partially because of my background, partially solely because of my background. I was very focused on a phase of public service. I thought that phase might take the form of running for something eventually. My wife and I talked about it. She said, over my dead body. By the way, it saddens me, not that she feels that way, it saddens me because I think she's right. I think, a lot of the partisanship that we see, it's hard for families to go through that. So her view was, we've got young girls, they're teenagers now, but still young, and so let's not go down that path. And so we started to have a conversation just about, if I had 25 years in the private sector, what could 25 years in the public sector look like? And I really care about looking back over my lifetime and feeling like I really had an impact. And he said to me something I'll never forget. He said, if you really care about impact, don't go federal. That's where the headlines are and that's where the sizzle is. But if you really want to change people's lives, that happens at the state and local level. So why don't you meet my team and see if there might be a fit here? And I met his whole team and I called him back and I said, I don't see a fit here. I don't see a role that you're looking for that makes sense for me given my background. He said, no. What do you want to do? We'll create one. And I just think this is such a testament to our governor and just the entrepreneurship and the focus on outcomes and not necessarily getting bogged down by process. And I said to myself, in that moment, I said, I can work with this guy. You know, this feels like somebody who cares about the right things and who I feel is just aligned with working towards outcomes and not necessarily just being focused on the politics of things. And so we ultimately settled on this concept of Chief Innovation Officer. It's the first time the state of Connecticut has had one, but it's not without precedent. There's 17 throughout the country that have them. I learned that by asking ChatGPT. Might be more now. And then, after 4 months, and I did not expect this to accelerate this quickly, he asked me to take on the additional role of Commissioner of the DECD, which of course I was honored and glad to do, and just went through the confirmation process. So that's kind of how it all happened. That's sort of the tactics side of it. And then the strategic things, why this role and why now for the state of Connecticut. Before I agreed to do all this, I sat down and I studied the economy of Connecticut. And I'd never done that before. When I moved here in 2011, I didn't study our GDP trends. I wanted a high-quality education for my children. I wanted a high quality of life for my family. I wanted a strong healthcare system and eventually take care of my aging parents. Those were the things that were in my head. But when I sat down and really studied the Connecticut economy, and I studied it like it was a business. That was my old world. I spent 25 years evaluating markets and companies. So I said, okay, let's look at Connecticut like as if it was a company. And I zoomed out. I took over 20 years of data and looked at economic trends across the state of Connecticut, not only in terms of composition of growth, but also comparing it to other regions, the U.S. overall. And what I saw was pretty interesting. If you go back far enough, and many of us in this room, I'm sure, lived through it, the time period between 2008 and 2018, what they now call the lost decade, I mean, it was bad. I mean, you can now see it in the data. When you're living through it in real time, you don't see it as much. But, our economy, which was booming prior to the global financial crisis, went from growing to declining. Over a period of 10 years, on an inflation-adjusted basis, our economy got smaller. And you don't have to be a Harvard MBA to know that's not the direction you want economies to go in. Only 3 states can say that, us, Wyoming, and Mississippi. With no offense to those 2 states, that's not the economic company we seek to keep. Since then, we had a global pandemic, which none of us wanted. But we were in a declining cycle. And those cycles can be self-amplifying. And so we were in a cycle where, and they're self-amplifying because people get skeptical, people get annoyed, companies leave the state, people leave the state, and that was all happening. We all know about GE in 2016, our population was in fact declining. And then we had a shock to the system. And the shock to the system was a pandemic none of us wanted, but it also rewrote certain rules. And if you look at economic trends post-pandemic, so in the 2 years prior to the pandemic, we were the 48th worst performing economy in the country. In the 2 years post the pandemic, we were the 15th best, 1-5. By the way, just out of curiosity, how many folks in the room knew that we were the 15th best performing economy? I got one in the back, but I think I told you. So that happens all the time. These are rooms. You are people who are paying attention. This is a group of constituents who are paying attention, and no one knows that what we've seen post-pandemic in terms of the resurgence of growth. When we were 48th in the country, everybody knew, right? Because that was a constantly talked about thing. We talked about our economy in a constant state of fiscal crisis. All of that was accurate. But since then, I'm just really trying to get the message out that we're experiencing a moment right now. We're experiencing a resurgence in growth. We're experiencing a resurgence in population growth. Our state has grown each of the last 3 years in population. No one else in the region can say that. Our state has been the best performing economy in the region for the last 2 years in a row. We are back-to-back champs, not only in basketball, but in economic performance. And I just need to get that message out, because if you look at over the last 6 years, the good news is we've had 6 years of consistent budget surpluses, and our system, which is cyclical by definition, and we can talk about the reasons why that is, but our system produced $11 billion in surpluses over that time frame. We used that to pay down our unfunded pension liabilities by $7.7 billion. We used that to pay up our rainy day fund to $3.3 billion, which is its statutory cap. The House is now finally in order. The next time our system produces $11 billion in surpluses, and I don't know if it'll produce that scale of surpluses, but I know it will produce surpluses. We're cyclical, and one thing I've learned from investing is cycles always cycle. The next time it produces that kind of degree of surpluses, I'd like to see some balance between not only paying down the mistakes of our past, we still have some more work to do on our debt load, but also investing in our future. And if we're gonna invest in our future, you've gotta be optimistic. You don't invest if you're pessimistic. If you think the future is not gonna be brighter than the present, you don't hire that person, you don't build that building, you don't acquire that company, you don't buy that piece of machinery. You have to believe the future is going to be brighter. And I'm just here to say to everyone, our future is brighter. And it's not because I'm just trying to sell something. I'm telling you it's in the data. If this were a company, I would want to invest in it. And so that's also why I enjoy conversations like these, because you're all now recruited. I need you all to go back into your communities and say, I heard this nerdy dude lay out some statistics that sound actually pretty compelling and interesting. Let's go. Let's invest. So a long answer again.
No, not at
But
all.
it gives you
Yeah,
a sense tactically how I got here,
That's
but
great.
also, I think importantly, why I was excited to do it.
Yeah, no, you hit on so many of the things that I wanted to ask you to talk about, and you're doing a great job.
I have a tendency of doing it.
No, it's clever. In fact, just to kind of expound on one thing, you just sort of put a call to action out there, which is great. But I had heard about the Governor Lamont asking you about, to forget the federal, serve locally, stay local, and you're talking to a room, as you mentioned, of economic developers at a municipal level, organizational level. We are locals, and one of the things I think that we oftentimes feel is a little bit like a Jerry Maguire, right? Which is like, help me help you.
Yes.
Right? Help me help you. So you touched on it a little bit right now with that call to action, but what can we as local economic developers do better to help you do your job and achieve all the goals that you've laid out? And conversely, so what do you see the relationship between DECD, the state, and the locals?
Yeah, well, first I would say is teach me. I'm new to this. I have a grand total of, 9 months of public service experience. And so, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm just trying to be a sponge. I'm just trying to listen to the needs of our communities, the needs of our businesses, the needs of our constituents, and put it all in these are large, complex systems. Even if you look at it and say, okay, I know where the North Star is, I know where we should be going. When you actually put it into practice and say, okay, how much can the state be doing to help move things in the right direction? How much should the state be doing? Because that's not always the role, I think, of the public sector. It's done in collaboration and partnership. So one thing I would always say is my door is wide open. I will share my contact information at the end. I am always listening, I'm always learning, and don't be afraid to call me. Sometimes people say, well, I'm not sure if this is material enough for you. Don't worry, we've got folks for whom I will find you a home, depending on what you want to talk about. But the first thing I would say is teach me. Second thing I would say is what I said before, but I'll amplify it. Teach those around you. I want also our children to know that Connecticut is no longer a place you need to leave. One of the things, if you look at population trends, we tend to gain people in their late 20s. We have real comparative advantage when people are starting their families. And we tend to lose people when they're, going off, start going off single. I mean, by the way, I met my wife in a bar in New York City. I get it. They got comparative advantage for those who are single. I get it. But you don't necessarily have to leave anymore. I mean, we have an incredible growing economy here that I think is a real opportunity for our graduates. So I would also say sharing the message not only with your communities, but also with your families and your children, and just sharing what an incredible place this is to not just build your family, but also build your career. And then the last thing I would say is, and again, it's repetitive, but help me invest. Help me think through things that we can do that are material and will move the needle. If I look at some of our investments in our economy over the last 20 years, I'm not going to say any of them are marginal. They've all been important, but they haven't necessarily been transformational. And that the reason for that is again, if you're going through a lost decade, you've got this high debt load and a cyclical economy and these big budget deficits, then it's hard to think about things that might be forward-looking and transformational. And I'm here because I really want our communities to start thinking big like that. I want to start thinking about larger, more transformational projects that can really change the face of Connecticut. We have a chance right now to be the first hybrid state. That's what the pandemic did. The pandemic changed the rules on the requirement of a commute distance between where you choose to live and some concrete and glass box somewhere. And it doesn't mean that goes away. I mean, I don't think we ever go back to pure virtual. But if you've got more flexibility on where to live, more folks are coming here to take advantage of the quality of life here. And so that energy is something I really want to start to invest behind in more transformational ways. And that I just view as an iterative dialogue. You know, again, I don't know what I don't know. I don't know about projects I can't see. I need our communities to bring them to me.
That's great, and that's one of the reasons we're doing what we're doing today, honestly. With David Lehman, we had CEDAS arranged a Q&A talk like this, and right at the same moment, right when he just started, you know, and similar to what you're saying, you know, it was a really early stage conversation to kind of get that dialogue going, and hopefully a lot of folks took advantage of what you're saying
I
to
think a
do.
comment of gratitude on just the topic of David. You know, when I was thinking about doing this, I found there was a community of civically minded business leaders who were incredibly generous with their time. And David spent an hour with me every Sunday for 6 weeks while I was thinking through this and where I might engage, how I might engage. And the last conversation I had before I said yes to the governor was breakfast with David. And he said to me, this is the best job he's ever had. And so I just want to keep amplifying this concept of service and those who have chosen it. It's not always easy. One of the unfortunate byproducts of what I think has become an increasingly partisan environment is there's a void getting created. And the void isn't always getting filled by the best people. And so the other thing I want to say is I talk to communities of clearly engaged folks, also help me fill that void. I'm not suggesting I'm the best people, I'm just suggesting that many of you are. And I'm hoping that we haven't entered a phase where my wife's opinion, which I understand, doesn't become the norm. I think we continue to need great people in these roles. And David is a great example of one.
So actually, to expound on that topic a bit, one of the questions I had asked, and you've already touched on it, but maybe you can go a little further, is coming from the private sector and being new in this role and new to public service, inevitably, I think in any level of government, people, let's call it the outsider perspective, look at it and go, boy, you know, if they just knew this, or boy, if I were running the show, I would do that. So as you approach this, the question I had was, you know, how does your private sector background and experience and knowledge inform your leadership and your decision-making ability now that you're helming, you know, this large state organization?
Yeah, you know, it's funny you ask this question now. On Saturday, I am speaking at my daughter's school, and they want to talk about private sector where it's applicable to public service and where it's not. So you're going to now be my test run of this. So, you know, there are areas in where I think it's directly applicable. You know, I mentioned it before. I spent my private sector career focused on markets and companies, but more from the investing world. Where would I like to put my investors' dollars, and with the hope that it produces an appropriate and attractive return. There's lots of comparables to that work here. You know, now what I'm doing is spending time with communities. And by the way, this job makes you look at the world in a fundamentally different way. I drive around now, and my eyes are open to everything around me. You know, you see old brownfields, these old plants, which, you know, are sunsetting or sunsetted, and by the way, dot our waterfront because they need water for cooling. And so these are now coming down, and we're reclaiming our waterfront. I drive around these communities. You know, we had a chance to visit with the first selectman earlier this week with the governor, and you know, you see the work that's happening, the investment that's happening. It really makes you look at the world in a fundamentally different way and think about the art of the possible. And that was also my old job. My old job was looking at markets and trying to think about what could be. And now driving around Connecticut, I'm looking around thinking about what could be. Now, let me tell you what's not applicable. In my old world, you know, I was fortunate enough to become senior in my, you know, when I ran the firm and the fund, which meant if I thought something should be done, it would get done. And I don't mean that egotistically, it's just that's kind of how it worked, right? That's in this world, I mentioned it being a large complex system. That's not just our economy. That is the stakeholders who are involved in the processes of getting decisions made and outcomes done. And I think a lot of people look at that from the outside and say, you know, that's politics. That's so messy, that's so slow. You know, I realized it's, one, democracies were not built to move quickly, but I also think it's there for a reason, and here's why. If you don't engage constituencies on decisions that will fundamentally transform economies, communities, and people's lives, there's always going to be some portion of that constituency that disagrees with the outcome. And that's because you have to make decisions. You have to make decisions about resource allocation, about prioritization, and there will always be a group, not because they're wrong, but because they just disagree. People look at the same set of information and just come to a different conclusion. If you don't work through the process, they'll reject the outcome. And so part of why these processes are here is because it's what's right, it's what's fair, it's what's equitable, and if it's done correctly, and I acknowledge it isn't always done correctly, then I think the outcome can be the right one. So I'm a little bit of a nerd. I do jigsaw puzzles. When I go on vacation with my kids, we do these big 1,000-person piece jigsaw puzzles, and I love them. I get obsessed. And this is the biggest puzzle there is, other than raising teenage girls. This is the biggest puzzle there is. So part of what I found so intellectually engaging about this job is just figuring out how to get it done. Again, I'm focused on impact, I'm focused on outcomes, but I'm also learning the process, such that my hope is when I'm done, I've learned it well enough that I can say I can get things done appropriately but efficiently.
That's great.
One last comment, sorry, I know I talked
Yeah,
too much.
no,
I like to
please
talk.
do.
I like to talk. The other thing I say is, on this concept of frustration with the people, part of why I just checked my phone real quick before I started speaking is today is the last day of session. So this is when all the activity and all the stuff is happening. And my team, I woke up this morning to text as it was 2 o'clock in the morning last night. My team is unbelievable. And by the way, talking about what I don't know, if I took on this role with being as new to public service as I was, I would have been completely, forgive me, screwed if it were not for this team. This team knows this world so incredibly well. I've got a senior team and the folks below them that are just so deeply engaged in the good work that there is no frustration. I sit in awe of my team.
That's great. And again, to reiterate, I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this here, because think of us as your extended team. So you have DECD, but you have, the wonderful work the COGS do and the wonderful work in independent organizations like AdvanceCT and others, and the municipal developers. So we're all an extension of your team. So, think of us that way. Getting a little into the weeds, tell us a little bit about the Municipal Redevelopment Authority.
What would you like to know?
Well, it was newly announced, and I just, didn't know if there was anything.
MRDA?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, by the way, I do that. I'll ask questions where I'm like, I don't know what MRDA is. I had one more question, then I figured it out. Now I figured it out. So, MRDA, which by the way they pronounce Murda, and I'm like, you guys gotta come on, you can do better than that. It's modeled after CRDA. And so, folks familiar with the CRDA? Okay, so it sounds like government, so I don't have to. What was successful about CRDA, partially it was leadership. So, like for many of you probably know, I think it's absolutely fantastic. But it was also viewed as successful, I think correctly so, because it could be targeted. So one of the challenges I have in just government is, and it's not a challenge, it's this way for the right reasons. We're applying state dollars, these are public dollars. So it has to be fair, equitable, it has to be open to everyone, all the things that are this way because it's the right way. But what it means is we set up programs, we make them available to all, and then we wait. And at times, we've got programs on the books that don't get taken advantage of. I've got a program on the books right now called Innovation Corridor, $100 million program. I've got no applications. There were some when it was first announced, but as it stands right now, there's $100 million of capital available for which there are no applications. And that's when being reactive is challenging. The nice thing about CRDA is it's proactive. It can, through its process and its community and its ecosystem, can go and look at projects and say, this needs to happen, why is it not happening? And oftentimes you find out that it's not happening because there's a gap in the capital stack that just doesn't make sense for a private sector person penciling it out to make the math work. And then we can step in and help fill that hole. And MRDA is modeled after the same approach, but to be broader, to be statewide. And so I'm super excited about it. Has leadership announced yet? Not yet. So leadership will announce. I'm super excited about it. I have to ask that question because I spoke at an event on, I think it was on Monday, and the person who's going to be leading MRDA was in the audience. And I said, do you want to make any comments on MRDA? Thinking it had been announced that he was going to be leading it, and now know it's a he. And it hadn't. So but I will announce shortly, and I am very excited about leadership as well. So I think the program is modeled after something that's been successful. We want to scale it, and I think leadership is going to be great.
Great. A couple more that will go to the audience. One of the first moves you made as innovation officer was the consolidation of CT Next into DECD, if that's the right way to put it. Most of us in this room remember the formation of CT Next, I think it was in 2016, and the Innovation Places Initiative. So what wasn't working in your eyes? I assume this was your decision, or certainly in part. Is this a reset, a reinvention? What was your thought process around that decision?
Yeah, I mean, reimagination is the word I keep using. And by the way, just to be clear, we will find out in the next 12 hours if we're successfully bringing it to the DECD, because it requires support of the legislature, but I'm confident it will be. So CT Next is an important program. It is so for those that don't know CT Next, it was formed in 2016, and it was originally conceived as a mechanism to invest in physical place to catalyze, inspire ideation, entrepreneurship, et cetera. And in 2016, that was deeply sound, right? You create these spaces for entrepreneurs to co-locate, so things like accelerators, innovation labs, co-working space, et cetera. Second point of fact is it was funded with bonding, which is dead. But the Lamont administration, and I support this view, doesn't view debt as the appropriate funding mechanism for programming and overhead people. CT Next is programming and overhead. It was investing in organizations, this was Innovation Places, to create a physical space, but ultimately it was programming and overhead. So it was viewed as it's a priority for this administration. It's certainly a priority for me as Chief Innovation Officer, but it was funded through a mechanism that was not considered appropriate nor sustainable. It had not received funding in 3 years. So I got the hard job on my second day to come in and, hey, can you fix this? Thank you so much. Here's my little plate to start to try to work through this. By the way, it was also a trial by fire. When we decided we didn't have funding, so unfortunately some people had to lose their jobs. And I went on a board meeting to explain why this was happening. I didn't know that was a public meeting. Trial by fire. I didn't know that the press was on it or would receive a transcript of the call 5 minutes after it ended. I get a call an hour later saying, hey, we'd like to interview you about 11 people losing their jobs. And I hated it. I take this work incredibly seriously. I hate it when somebody loses their job, but it was just the reality. It was what had to happen. And the next day an article comes out, all about 11 people losing their jobs, with a smiling photo of me at the top. Because they used a stock photo from when they first interviewed me, and it just broke my heart. And, so this is why I'm learning, and I'll get better, but I wasn't then, and I'm not sure I am now, anticipating problems the way I would like to. In my old world, I knew where my problems were coming from. Now I'm still learning. But now fast forward to where we are today. I expect later today we will be successful in taking this CT Next work into the DECD as an Office of Innovation. The work will continue, so everything CT Next had committed to prior to this will happen. I've committed to that publicly, will not change. And now we're going to set it up on a sustainable funding path. These types of programs, you've got to get an appropriation, you've got to fight for budget. It's easier to fight for budget when you're inside an agency versus an outside quasi, or in this case it was a subsidiary of a quasi. So that's why it all happened. We have hired new leadership. Its chairman is my chief of staff, who's absolutely fantastic. He worked on the original programming back in 2016. We hired a fantastic woman named Jessica Dodge, who's now the executive director, managing director, leadership. So she's now leading it, and we will rebuild the team, and the work will continue. Again, the message I just keep trying to send everybody is this is a priority for us. We just had to fix it, and it's we're very close to having it be fixed.
That's great, thank you for that. Last question I have is there a bumper sticker in the future that reads, O'Keefe for governor?
I've gotten this before, which I appreciated. You got to talk to my campaign manager. Her name is Sarah O'Keefe. She's the worst campaign manager in the world.
She's an anti-campaign manager.
No, look, let me say this. I always thought I would run for something eventually. I may eventually. Right now the kids are in school, and it'd be too much for the family. But I do view this as my next 25 years of my life. What form that takes and what journey it takes me on, we'll see. But I'll say this: it's really nice being in this role with absolutely no ulterior motives. you know, it really gives me the ability to just look at outcomes that I think are right. You know, by the way, regardless of politics, I'll give one small example. I was on a call, so I'm a Democrat that's, you know, easily discoverable, so it's controversial to say, because I should say, mine is a nonpartisan position. You know, economic development is not a partisan issue or topic, but I am a Democrat, and I was on a call where I was just violently agreeing with the two legislatures that were on it, because what they were saying was right. And I'm getting texts from someone on my staff who's saying, hey, reminder, these are Republicans. And I called that person afterwards and I said, I don't know how else to say this. I don't give a shit. I'm focused on outcomes. I'm focused on what's right. And I'm sure that's probably going to limit whatever, if I ever go into politics. I'm sure I'm screwing all that up as we speak in real time. But it's nice for me. It allows many more degrees of freedom to be able to, you know, do what's right, regardless of whether there might be some political consideration. I'm not going to worry about that.
Yeah, and I think what you just described at your situation with the state is very much what we all feel. You know, when you work in economic development in the towns and municipalities, et cetera, you have to be nonpartisan or you can't do your job, frankly.
Yeah.
You know, and it's one of the nice things about the work that we do is it can be, and you can actually, you know, have outcomes and work with everybody.
Right.
So, what I'd like to do is you know, this is a great group here, and as Dan said, you know, he would love to hear from you. So whether it's a question, whether it's a comment, or you know, something you might have, I'd invite you to come over here, right over to the podium here, and tell us who you are, what municipality or organization you represent, and ask your question or make your comment. Who would like to go first? Well, I'll call on somebody if nobody does. Michelle?
No.
Okay, come forward.
No, Kevin.
I knew Kevin. And this gives Dan an opportunity to meet some of those that in the room that he doesn't already know.
Hi, Dan. Michelle McCabe from Connecticut Main Street. I love hearing everything that you've had to say, Commissioner, especially your focus on outcomes. The team at Connecticut Main Street jokes that data is my love language, and it really is. But I will say that I think we're challenged in acquiring it. You know, data is very expensive because it's time consuming, and you need to have an infrastructure to put the data in and make it easily accessible, analyzable, et cetera. And we're one of the few sort of statewide agencies taking a look, as you know, at main streets and downtowns. We obviously have regional partners and other state partners, and it's hard to be able to take a look at the jigsaw puzzle that is Connecticut and really understand jobs are here, housing is here. This town is doing this kind of a thing, but this town's doing this kind of a thing, and they're next to each other. And this is a great opportunity to start, you know, creating both a local and a regional and a statewide narrative. And I'm curious if you have anything in the works, because this is a perfect, obviously, place for the state to provide opportunities for us to feed data into something, and then to be able to access that data in ways that are meaningful so we can measure our own impact and contribute to the impact that you're seeking.
Yeah, it's a great question, an important question. If data is your love language, prepare to fall in love, but know that I'm taken. When I was first trying to engage here, you know, one of the conversations I asked the governor is, you know, what's the process you go through when you're data informing decisions? When you're working through policy decisions that are complicated, for which there's likely no right answer, how do you data inform those decisions? And the answer was, you know, he, as you may imagine, relies upon his agencies, his agency heads to help inform those decisions. And as I kind of sat back and looked at the way our government in Connecticut is structured, it is a little more siloed. You know, we have these agencies where a lot of the work happens, and then the office of the governor provides connective tissue between them all. But I didn't see anyone looking dispassionately on a nonpartisan basis on just the data, just help inform some of these decisions. So I started to do it. So when I first joined as Chief Innovation Officer, I mentioned you know, some of the modeling and the work I had done around economic analysis. I broadened that to start looking at other trends across the state. Because I think there's a real opportunity here. We're economically non-rivaled. There's a little bit of rivalry because, you know, I want to beat Massachusetts, my home state, despite Boston sports teams being the best sports teams. Sorry, But it's not rivaled in the sense that you can ask about what's working there, what's working here, or what's not working here, and make decisions around changes. I think that's the same is also true for our towns and municipalities. You're not rivaled. You can actually collaborate. We've stood up something within the DECD called the Institute for Developmental Economic Analysis. I think I might be screwing that up a little bit, but IDEA is the acronym, and it is a group that is economists and analytical folks with analytical backgrounds that are looking at data across state government to now help inform decisions and also come up with ideas. And it's brand new. We just started it. It's being led by Dave Stuber, who's not only my chief of staff, but also director of strategic initiatives. I'd love to expand it. I'd love to see it eventually become cross-agency in nature, because I view this as a meta layer. And if that can grow to the point where it also can support towns and municipalities in not only taking in data, but helping to also offer an analytical tool, I think that would be a great use of resources. So I'm working on it. I invite ideas that may help expand it, change it, augment it. Because it is brand new and it's going to take some time, but I'm excited about it.
That's awesome, thank you.
Great, wonderful. Rose, can you step forward? And then Kevin.
I'm gonna go stand right next to him.
Yeah, you can form a queue.
Beat you to it. Hi, everyone. I'm Rose Ponte. I'm the Economic Development Director for the town of Farmington. And I just want to thank you, Commissioner, for taking the time to tell us your vision. And I have to say, the impactful and transformative approach is really my love language. That's what I'm always looking at. So for me, when you said that things are cyclical and you said how we've moved up to 15th, knowing that you look at data, are we still on the right track? What are the things that we need to continue to do to make sure that maybe 15th becomes 10th or even moves up a little bit? And what are the things we need to avoid so we don't go back on the downward trend?
Yeah, absolutely phenomenal question. All right, so let me try to be succinct, because there's a lot of moving pieces here, again, large complex system. If I look at our performance over the last 2 years, what were the principal contributors to our recovery and economic growth, the acceleration in economic growth? It was a couple things. It was continued performance of some of our growth sectors, our secular growth sectors. These are things like the information industry, software, management of professional businesses, et cetera. Those continue to grow, but are smaller portions of our economy. The biggest contributor to growth, just meaning the largest sector of our economy that also grew, contributed to overall growth, was the manufacturing sector, which for us, as you guys all know, is principally the defense sector. So why is that happening? That is happening because the federal government has reprioritized supply chains feeding the defense sector and is nearshoring them and onshoring them. Great thing for the Connecticut economy. But here's what I worry about, and I'm now going to tell you about an existential risk that we all need to be focused on. We have high energy prices. And that is not a Connecticut problem, that is a regional problem, that is our ISO. We have an expectation that there is incremental demand on our horizon. This is the impact of artificial intelligence, the impact of EVs. You don't have to be, I didn't pay attention every day in business school, but if incremental demand outpaces incremental supply, the pricing problem is going to become worse. And that's existential for us because manufacturing, again, principally the defense sector, is 12% of our GDP and increasing because it's growing. Every other state in the ISO, it's a smaller, meaningfully smaller portion of their economies and declining. So what does that mean? That means if you accept as a base principle, as I do, that manufacturing is a high energy sector, that means we have a greater risk from rising energy prices than the rest of the ISO. We can talk about the potential solutions. None of them are easy. I am a progressive. I would love to sit here and tell you that renewables will come on at a fast enough scale to reverse that trend. I can tell you I'm not confident in that. And so the choices are going to be difficult. We're working on them. There's lots of stuff we can talk about, but again, none of these choices are going to be particularly easy. So what does that mean? That means we continue to focus on the sectors of our economy that, I think of it as offense and defense. Defense is focused on the sectors of our economy that we have to support. It's finance and insurance, 14% of our GDP, relatively flat. Manufacturing, 12% of our GDP, growing. Healthcare, 8% of our GDP, growing. And then offense, really invest in the industries of our future. What are the industries of our future? We're seeing clustering around some of these technology-driven industries. We're seeing clustering around biotech, principally in New Haven. We're seeing clustering around insurtech, principally in Hartford. We're seeing clustering around fintech, principally in Stanford. I'm picking on some of our cities. I know I'm not sitting in a city, but that's helping all of our communities grow. So we just need to continue to support those growth industries. And that's why I keep coming back to this concept of getting out of the mindset of just, paying down debt or uses of capital that aren't necessarily investing in our forward future. That really becomes existential, particularly if we end up in an environment of rising energy prices.
Thank you.
Want to run?
Kevin?
Morning, Dave. Kevin Brown, President of Norwich Community Development Corporation. My love language is raising teenage daughters, so you and I can go fall in love.
And I have, so I can help you.
And all the help I can get.
And this question is a little more on the foundational or maybe even squishy side, not as direct as some of the questions and the answers that you give. You mentioned that Governor Lamont told you that if you wanted to serve and make a difference, you should do it at the municipal or state level.
Yeah.
And so my question is, in this audience of people who, and I anybody who's spoken to me knows that I use the word parochial over and over again, because it is my job to look after Norwich. That doesn't mean I don't care about Ledger, Preston, Sprague, London, but I know what my job is. So in this state, which either proudly or mistakenly likes to say we are 169 separate towns and municipalities, how are you going to be able to reconcile that or help us reconcile that with more regional or statewide looks and solutions?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. As you all know, we're one of only 2 states without counties, or at least we have counties, but we don't have county government, which can serve as a way to sort of functionally tie communities together. I think it's on me. I think it's on us. I think it's on us to travel around and, again, this is the part of the job that I love, to really kind of understand the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for all of these different communities in ways in which we can try to be helpful, to stitch it all together. I found a book when I moved into my office, and it was a book about the end of counties in Connecticut. And I haven't read it yet. It's sitting on it's on my list. I'm like, I kind of want to read it, because I want to sort of figure out why we got there. Now look, we don't need the incremental taxes. So that's by the way, what county government also brings, is incremental taxes. But we also have this funny little issue. This is not to your question, but just to mention it. We end up on all these lists where people say, well, we have a high cost of doing business here. It's high cost for individuals here. Look, we're never going to be a low-cost state. We don't have sunshine to sell to tourists, as the government likes to say in Florida. We don't have elements of but we have our successful people. We have a highly educated workforce who does highly nuanced and difficult work. They're highly compensated because of it. That's, that is the product that businesses are willing to pay for in the state of Connecticut. But one of the funny things it does to us is it makes us look comparatively worse, because not every list picks up the incremental taxes you pay to your county governments. So there's puts and takes, I suppose, on either side of the issue. But it does create this little bit of this parochial form of engagement. But we're a small state. We're 3.6 million people. I think we can also, let me say this other thing. Not only are we perhaps 169 different municipalities, I think we also at times have different identities across the state. We don't have a professional sports team, although I would argue UConn is our professional sports team. I'm on the board of trustees, I need to say that. So we don't have as much, you asked me, am I a Boston or a New York fan? And that drives me bonkers, because I'm a Connecticut fan, and so I just want to do, we need to find ways to develop and understand what it means to be from Connecticut, to be proud again, to be from Connecticut. So one of the things I say when I travel around the state is, I started my talk here saying this: Connecticut, in my mind's eye, is where you went when you made it, and had like this aspirational thing to it, this reputation. And I want to get back to that. I wanted people to know and understand that there's something now happening that they can be deeply proud of. But you're right, that means we need the connective tissue. And because we're a relatively small state, I think that is something state government can do in support with our municipal leaders. It's why I spend so much time traveling around the state. Part of it's because I like to see different folks, I like to meet people, but I want to learn, what drives different portions of it. It's not a great answer, and I
No,
recognize
I
that.
didn't think you'd be able to have the
Yeah.
answer. It's
Yeah.
just something we are all struggling with all the time.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
I mean, I like the new branding. We make it here. You know, I like the way it connects so many different, has so many different meanings and levels depending on how you apply it. I think that has been an
So
improvement.
shout out to Anthony, who's
Yeah.
our Chief Marketing Officer, the man with 2 first names but 1 vision. He is the architect behind that. I think he did a phenomenal job. And when I talk about Connecticut being the place where you go when you made it, I now want everyone to stay and make it here. So that's the way I kind of try to.
You can hang your hat on it. I think we have time for one more.
Perry Maresca, Economic and Business Development Manager from Brantford. And I just want to say, you talk about like workforce development, workforce housing. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that, how that worked for you and everything. Because right now in Brantford, we've got apartments being developed.
Yeah.
We're trying to get more within the transit-oriented district. We've got the train, we've got the highway, we've got Route 1 that goes right through, and we've got bus service, but like the bus service is all tied in through years ago when there was a trolley, so that obviously has to be changed. But when we talk about incentives, it scares me when we give businesses money to keep them in the state, or not so much to keep them, but to bring them into the state. I go back to when Starter was there and they got a ton of money, and that's probably well before your time. We had another company recently, Bausch and Strobel, and they were all prepared to do something in Brantford. They were right down the street, and then Tennessee lured them. And Tennessee was giving them money and everything. They looked down and they said, we don't have the workforce down in Tennessee. So they came back and they built this beautiful state-of-the-art facility in Brantford. So if we continue to push the fact that we've got the right workforce, and we have a lot of biotech that is in town, and they always say, we need the workforce.
Yeah.
So whatever we can do to do that, and then part of that is, since COVID, we had a huge influx from people that had their second homes in Brantford, Guilford, Madison, Clinton. Those are now their first homes, their primary homes, and they're living here 5 or 6 days a week, and they're running into Manhattan to conduct business and then come back. And everything else they're doing is virtual or whatever. So we've got traffic problems on 95 east there, and people don't use the rail because the service is terrible.
Yeah.
And since the bridge was done, the Quinnipiac Bridge, it takes no time to get into New Haven.
Yeah.
And even more so, it takes no time to get to the West Haven train station because of the fact that you can get to West Haven and then go right into Manhattan or right into Stamford or wherever it is. So we definitely need to work on east of New Haven to continue to support New Haven. And the airport is fantastic. Everybody's using that as commuter.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but thank you very much.
Of course. Now, I mentioned these being large, complex systems. I think you just listed all of them. So you now see why I wish I could just wave my magic wand and say, go fix all of that, and we'd have a booming economy. Let me try to parse a little bit and give you some views. I think in economic progression, you have accelerants and you have limiters. Accelerants are some of the things that I mentioned, things investing in the workforce of our future, in the industries of our future, et cetera. Decelerants, things that are holding us back, are things like workforce and housing. Can you produce the workers that can do the work of our future, and can you find a place to put them? Housing. I'll mention housing first. I told you a little bit about my background. I grew up in a low-income background. My mother was a public school teacher. She had 8 people packed into a 3-bedroom. We lived in what we would call workforce housing. We just stretched the definition. And so I take workforce housing personally, because economies cannot grow at their potential if you don't put workforce, if you don't find housing for workforce. It's definitional. And workforce housing are the places to put our teachers, our police, our firefighters, folks that help support our communities and its underlying growth. We see pushback from communities, and we all know this, we all experience it. I live in New Canaan, we're part of the problem, I acknowledge that. And people do it because it's this not in my backyard thing. They say, if you put workforce housing in my community, the price of my home will go down. You are making the absolute wrong decision. Because if you don't put workforce housing in, the economy will not grow to its potential, and that will not, it may not drive down the price of your house, but it's certainly not going to allow it to increase at its same rate. Workforce housing, when done in modern times, is incredible. It fits into the communities. It doesn't, people think of I used to be a huge fan of the show The Wire, which was all about Baltimore and row houses. People think it's like row houses and these incorrigibles are going to come into their communities. Get over it. That's not what this is. That's not what we're talking about. So I think that's super important as it relates to workforce housing. You bring up transportation, out of my lane, that's DOT, but I will say this, we get it. I used to commute to the city. My commute got worse every single year because the train slowed. Every time there was a problem, they would slow them down. We've all experienced it. I think you've all seen the governor's announcement. We're investing aggressively in not only new rail, but new infrastructure. It will take time. It will get better, but it will take time. I'm trying to think what else. That was transportation, workforce. You had something else in your list I wanted to mention.
Giving incentives.
No, I got it. You talked about communities and the importance of balancing investment in our communities. If my thesis is right, and this concept of the pandemic rewriting certain economic rules in ways you didn't expect, and you're experiencing it in these communities, individuals now able to live where they couldn't before, then that means people are increasingly making decisions about where to live, disassociated from their employer's decision of where to base themselves. I will tell you right now, as an economic development professional, if a company wants to move their headquarters to the state of Connecticut, I have a whole toolbox that Lisa and I can roll out. If someone calls me tomorrow and says, I'm not moving my headquarters there, but I want to hire 1,000 people in the state of Connecticut, I got nothing. Because the incentives roll through in companies. And so I'm working on that and working on reimagining incentives to not only focus on employers and where they want to be, but people and where they want to be. Our largest program is the Community Investment Fund. I'm sure you're aware of it. It's an $875 million program. There's no cap on what we, with the support of the legislator, can invest in these communities. So I just say to all of you, bring us larger, more transformational projects that can really continue to kind of change our communities into incredible places where people want to be. That is becoming a greater source of economic growth, individuals deciding where they want to be, I think, than employers necessarily locating where they want to locate. Let me leave you with one last thought. The governor and I travel around a lot and speak to a lot of companies, not just within the states trying to get them to move here, but also internationally and trying to get them to come here. And we had a very high profile, sorry, I picked this up because I had to look right, and now I think I'm making a lot of background noise, so I apologize. We had a very high profile European company who, wanted to move here, and they came in for a conversation, and I thought the whole conversation was going to be about the economy of the state of Connecticut. I built all the normal stuff of what that could look like, and I think it's positive, and that was the message. And this CEO and founder didn't want to talk about any of that. He wanted to talk about our communities. Is this a place where his employers want to live? Employees want to live. And one thing that's becoming increasingly differentiated for the state of Connecticut, and I'm seeing this from international observers. Again, mine is not a partisan position, so forgive me if this sounds partisan. But if you're an international observer looking at the United States, it doesn't look great right now. To a lot of folks, it looks like one large dumpster fire, if I'm being candid. And you're seeing a lot of state level politicians who, in my view, are, perhaps because they have national ambitions, are looking for that next headline of outrage. This is not a blue state versus red state thing. You also see these large deficits in other states. I think we're actually demonstrating that you can do this. You can lead from the center, which is where the vast majority of us are, with quiet excellence. Just do what's right. So we're seeing a resurgence in economic growth, a resurgence in population growth, all while we have had consistent budget surpluses. That's leading from the center.
I gotta do it. I'm a product, and first of all, first selectman of the town of Stafford, not Stanford, Stafford. Commissioner and I are very, very much similar in that we're probably new to our roles or newest to our roles, but I'm a product of something that worked very, very well. I was elected, and of course in November, went right to work, but on a Saturday, I got a call right away from a representative saying, would you sign a letter of intent or an interest of a company coming to Stafford Springs? So I did that, and I did it with our representative. Lo and behold, just 5 or 6 months later, I did a call that someone would like to come to our town and meet with us, and it happened to be the governor, of course, the commissioner, to give us the news that a company, happened to be known as TTM, was bringing 125 jobs to the town of Stafford. Third largest town in Connecticut, area-wise, Economically, there's not a whole lot of stuff going on there. It was hard to find pizza. I owe you a piece of pizza. But it was something that just gave our town a boost. I'm absolutely grateful. Town Stafford's grateful. It's one of those things that you were talking about that worked. We're a product of that, and I couldn't be happier. And I want to thank you for this.
Thank you, Dan, for being here. We appreciate it. First and foremost, one more round of applause for Dan. I want to thank the Webb Deane Stevens Museum for this beautiful venue. And we want to thank Mayor Lesser of the town of Wethersfield for hosting us. We're going to have the mayor pop up and say a couple of words. We want to thank M&G Engineering for sponsoring the event. And of course, AdvanceCT for partnering with CEDAS on this. Just want to tell you, upcoming, we have a legislative recap, again, partnering with AdvanceCT. It's going to be a virtual session. As Dan mentioned, today's the last day of session. So this will be on May 21st at 10 o'clock. It's a virtual session recapping the legislative policies that were voted upon this session. And then best practices in land use and economic development. So CEDAS is continuing to offer this certification program. We encourage all municipalities to go on the CEDAS website and apply for that certification program. We're now accepting applications on the CEDAS website. We're going to have a webinar on that on May 23rd at 1 p.m. On how to apply. It's very simple. So with that, I want to invite the mayor to step forward.
Over here, Kevin.
You're over there. All right, take it away.
Thank you, Kevin, and maybe we can give a round of applause to Kevin and CEDAS for a great job. I'm so grateful you're all here, and I'm going to talk about how we can do some things together in a minute, but I want to talk about the commissioner for a second, because not only did you hear the extraordinary background, the wonderful leader is, I want to tell you a little bit about the person, because I always like to get to know the type of person someone is. So we got connected at the end of last year, right around the holidays, between Christmas and New Year's. And I texted Dan and I said, I'd love to have a quick chat with you. And right away, within minutes, he said, love to, yes, love to do that. So we had a phone call, we talked about our backgrounds in some mutual, similar industry. I have 3 daughters, which is why I'm getting so gray. One is a teenager, the other 2 are older. And I said, I have one ask of you, Commissioner. Would you come to Wethersfield? And without hesitation, yes, let me get through the confirmation hearings, which he did. As soon as he got through, he came to Wethersfield, he met with our economic development team, our town manager, and gave us some great insights of things we can do. And he listened to some of our concerns and our opportunities. And I can't thank the commissioner for that, the type of person he is. And I will tell you this, I loved your reference to the art of the possible. The art of the possible, some of you may know, maybe you're referencing this, is actually a book written by Ben and Ross Zander. Ben Zander is the current conductor of the Boston Philharmonic. This book is about viewing everything through the lens of possibility. Said another way, or more simpler for me, is and the commissioner talked about it, the way I try to see things is not as they are, but as they can be. And leading into that, what I'd like to see us do as economic development people, as first selectmen, as leaders of our state, is let us work together and tell us about your events, your fun things that are going on, your fairs, your festivals, your important things. We want to come to your town, spend money, visit your town, learn more about your town, and we want you to come to Wethersfield, the largest historical and cultural district in the state of Connecticut, where George Washington spent 5 nights here planning the pivotal battle of the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Yorktown. It's actually called the Wethersfield Conference. We're really proud of that. And right around the corner, the largest continuous fire department, volunteer fire department in the United States, 1803. That's 221 years. I was not here then, but that is pretty cool. 1803, the largest. So we have a lot of history right where you all are. We want you to come here. We want you to come to our restaurant. Our wonderful economic development Zach helped put this program together and put this together. These are our restaurants. I hope you will, in this walking distance, I hope you will stay today. Come have lunch with us. But we also want to go to your towns. We're all in this together. You know, we talk about we're all 169 towns. The gentleman of Fiefton, we care about our gentleman from Norwich. Yes, we care about our town, but we care about our state, and we can help each other. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for coming to Wethersfield, Commissioner. Thank you, CEDA. I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you.
Thank you.